it's very common when I do a book signing or I'm online or somebody from the Tattoo Buddha will send me an email and they'll say, I always wanted to write, or I have a book I want to write, or I started a book but I couldn't finish it. Writing leaves something that is visceral, it's physical, it's real, and it doesn't necessarily stop when you stop and leave this world. And the more you can work with your fear, the easier it's going to be to get those first words down. And, you know, and really find your way. There are some people who are still very comfortable writing with pencil and paper. Do it. There are some people who only like to type on laptops because it's either visually or physically more easy. Do it. You know, if you have to write in ketchup on a napkin, however it comes out of you that makes you feel good, do it. You know, for that point, when that beginning part of writing, throw away the do and do not list, throw away the perfection, and just write however you like to, whatever you do. You know, in exercise, they always say the best form of exercise is the one you will do. And I think that's the same with writing. The best way to write is the way that you want to write, the way that feels good to you.
Welcome to the Daily Soul Bytes Show. I am your host, Bolaabimbola, frequency alchemist, life coach, and energy practitioner. Daily Soul Bytes is where we have guests who are experts in leadership, psychology, and spirituality, sharing their insights for the expansion of collective consciousness. And today I have a very special guest, Kellie Schorr, all the way from Virginia in the United States. Welcome to the show, Kellie.
Thank you.
It's so nice to have you here, Kellie. I can't wait for our conversation. I'll read your bio before we start. Kellie Schorr is a traditionally published novelist. Kellie has been practicing meditation for over 20 years and is a Buddhist yogi in the Nyingma lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. She's a member of the Vajra Sangha of the Buddhist Studies Institute and a personal student of Dr. Pema Khandro. I love that you have such a standing in the Buddhist traditions, and I would love to hear more about how you have embodied that in your writing, because we were saying before we started today that writing can be done from that place of shadow, and it can also be done from that place of light, and how we embody our essence in the way we write is so key. So I'd love you to tell us, Kellie, how did you come to this place where you are embodying your essence in the way you write? You may have come from a time when you never did that, or you may have always done that from when you were a child. I'd love to know a bit about your journey and how you have come to embody writing from a place of inner essence.
I started writing like most people when I was very small. I always wanted to tell stories, and I began to write them down, and was kind of a very introverted person. So even as a young person, you know, I had my journal, and I would start writing about my day, and then, you know, 10 minutes in, I was like writing some sort of fantastical story, you know, and so I would be like, my math teacher is mean, and then a dragon came out, and you know, so I've always had that idea of working out what's going on inside me through writing. When I went to college, when I first got there, I was so overwhelmed with all of the people and all of the stimulus and noise and just all the things that go when you're new at college and away from home. And it manifested in that I couldn't sleep. And so I was sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night, trying to get everything done. And I went to the student counseling office and I said, I can't sleep. I don't feel well. And she said, I think the best place for you, because I had tried traditional medicine, I had tried different things. She said, there is a Buddhist center not far away that teaches meditation. And if you can't sleep, maybe you can at least learn to put your body at rest until you can sleep. And that was the beginning of my Buddhist journey. So I started meditating, you know, for a very practical reason, to learn how to sleep. Mm-hmm. But once I started, I noticed that I really didn't need it for sleep because the overwhelmingness of the world wasn't as loud or strong. And the more I was able to control my own mind and control what was going on, the easier it was for me to not feel anxiety and not feel stressed. And that worked for me very well. I had a very traditional career. I worked as an HIV/AIDS prevention specialist for years and years, and always sort of wrote on the side. It was a hobby. It was something I liked to do. I ended up writing a lot of informational material about AIDS, and in the process of that, started writing some stories that the CDC here in America at the time was doing a prevention where they wanted to write stories where safe sex was part of the story. And kind of approach that in a different way. And so I did some safe sex manuals. I did some safe sex stories. And the person who I was doing this for said, you're really a good story writer. Have you thought about writing? And I said, I've always loved writing, but I don't know. And then as the country changed and they stopped sort of funding prevention and funding help for HIV/AIDS, I sort of ended up every month it seemed like I was losing hours. And I would fill those hours by writing. And I started working with a mentor who got me involved in commission novel writing, which is where you write a novel, you sell it to a publisher, and they publish it under their own names. So instead of the books coming out under your name, I always like to tell people when they ask what you do, I always say, I write the books that you lose at the beach. And because they're just paperbacks that come out under the publisher's name. But I really enjoyed it. And eventually I wrote a book, and the people who were buying that book said, this could be a published book. This could go under your name. This could be a good novel for you. You should get an agent. You should go forward. And at that point in my writing journey, after all of these years of meditation, and by this point, studying Buddhism and understanding the world and myself at a much different place and frequency, that was when I started feeling the worst pressure. Because suddenly I'm having to write a certain way, and I'm having that writing to be accepted in a certain way. And I really got blocked. I went through a terrible period of writing block. I went through what all writers go through, rejection letters and lots of criticism, and critique, not in a bad way, but just a lot of it. Even when it's good critique, when you hear so much of it, you're like, And so ultimately, I started doing Buddhist practices to kind of deal with the emotions of being at that part of my writing career. And discovered the more I did that, the easier it was to write and the better the writing got. And it kind of that light came into that shadow that said, I have to remember that I'm not writing to somebody other than me, that we are a connected entity. We are all connected. And so instead of approaching this as, I'm writing this for someone else, I'm writing this as part of someone else. And that just gave me so much energy and so much joy to remember that important connection that is a big principle, of course, in Buddhism, that we are all connected, and it's our interconnection that makes us happy and that makes us aware of that.
Thank you so much, because that's a powerful journey, and all the lessons. Thanks for sharing all those lessons, because you're right. There's that writing block that we all get, whether we have had writing encouraged as children or not. We come as adults, and some of the stories that we want to tell do not always flow as easily as we want them to. And I think there's a lot of wisdom that you have garnered, especially with using that notion of Buddhism, and also embodiment of the essence of oneness. I love that. So I'd love you to tell us, Kellie, what is embodied writing? You've explained some of it already, but if you could just give a definition of that, of what that term embodied writing is.
When I talk about embodied writing, or I use that term, it's the best way I know to describe that understanding of a writing that comes from the energy and the alignment that you have in your body within yourself. And it's a way of, in Buddhism, we talk about the body, soul, and mind, and how they are this one thing that makes you and that helps you and helps you awaken. And embodied writing is taking that body, soul, and mind and writing from that place. Instead of writing from, oh, here's my outline in my story, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, is to, before you write, meditate and open yourself up and think, how does this character feel? How do I feel? How does this feel inside me that this is going to happen? There's kind of an old saying, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. You know, you have to have emotion in what you write. You have to have that connection in what you write. And this is a way to not just access the shadowy parts of what you write, but the inherent being and essence of what you're writing, the truth of what you're writing. You know, fiction is a way of telling the truth that people can hear. And by opening up, by embodying those stories, by embodying your process, it helps you get to those deep core feelings and energies so that you can find the words to put that out. And so in embodied writing, I always meditate first and open myself. I think of what scene I'm writing or what story I'm working on. And then I sit at my computer, and before I type anything, I dig as deeply as I can into me and see, how does that story feel? How does that story taste? How does that story connect me and remind me of that great connection? And then I start to write. And so it sort of imbibes your writing with emotion and heart and mind and energy. And so it's not that sort of just dry this and this and this, but it really takes that reader because they can hear that. So embodied writing is taking what you're writing into you and understanding that, accessing that inside of you. You know, fictional characters aren't somebody that you make up. They're somebody that you know. There's somebody inside of you, or there's something inside of you that's trying to tell you something. Like most writers, I learn so much about myself writing these fictional stories, because once I get to those, once I embody that story, once those characters are inside me, I realize that this is grief that I want to talk about. My current novel, The Space Between Breaths, that's out now, is a story about three women with very different forms of grief, and how this has led them to a terrible traumatic incident. And so as I began writing that, I also began meditating and understanding a little bit about my grief and what I wanted to say. And this story is not me, it's not about me, but it has that truth about grief, so that when I read it, I say, this is exactly how that grief felt. And then when I have other readers who've read it, they said, you know, when I lost my mother, when I lost my daughter, this is how I felt. This is what I went through. And it's not that I've just sort of magically forged this connection. It's because by connecting, embodying this, and embodying the understanding that we are connected, I am aligning with the truth. In Buddhism, we believe that all people are born with a basic goodness, and all people are born with all the knowledge that they need. And what we do is we grow, is we connect to it. And we develop and understand it. And we do that, we connect to it by reading great masters and great wisdom. We connect to it through discipline and daily practice. We connect to it through friendships and shared experiences. We connect to it with each other right now. But it comes from this core that every person has, and no one can take from you. No trauma, no wound. It is that deep, deep part of you that nothing can take. And in our world, we get so separated from that, and ultimately from our own bodies and our own body spirit, with a world that's so challenging and can teach you, depending on where you grew up and how you grew up, such harmful lessons about who you are and what you're worth and what makes you worthy. And when you embody that writing, when you go to do that, you start scraping away that surface to that good core, to that knowledgeable core that is connected like a river. And so suddenly You're not getting a glass of water out of the sink. You're reaching into that deep ocean that we're all a part of. And that makes it easier to write. That takes away those writing blocks. So embodied writing is really allowing yourself to dig to the deepest parts that you have, that are sometimes shadow, sometimes light, sometimes, with my favorite word is chiaroscuro, which is the interplay between darkness and light. It's an art term. And that's where you find these great stories. That's where you find these characters. That's where you find a way, not just to write a good story, but to write a story that other people can feel and can read. Ultimately, the goal of a fiction writer is to entertain, but beyond that really is for the hours that someone's going to give you with their life to read your story, you want to support them, you want to enlighten them, you want them to learn something about their heart, their life, their joy, while they're being entertained.
I love that. Do you work with only fiction writing?
I publish only fiction. That's probably 90% of my written work. I do nonfiction writing for myself. I have a Substack where I do an essay every week. I had written once, I wrote sort of a Buddhist nonfiction collection of essays about interconnection and about how to be happy and all those things, and it just didn't get published. Here in the US, it's very, very hard to get published. There's hundreds of thousands of people every day doing things, and my agent at the time said, I just don't see a market for this. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of publishing decisions are made. You can write the best book in the world, but if you can't prove someone will pay for it, it just doesn't get out as well. But I enjoyed writing it. I shared it with some friends, and it was a good practice. So my nonfiction writing, I do write nonfiction for the Tattooed Buddha, which is a Buddhist magazine. I write a monthly column that sort of talks about Buddhist perspectives on the things that are going on in our world and going on around us, and how to use that Buddhist perspective to align with strength and courage and not lose hope, and to have anger and honor that anger in a way that is aware and enlightened, and to have joy and honor that joy. Because sometimes, particularly with everything going on, it's sometimes you feel a little bit guilty if you're feeling happy because so much of the world is on fire. And honoring that joy is just as important as those moments when you say, this is happening and it makes me angry, and honoring that anger and letting that come out. And I think that's a really important thing.
Thank you, Kellie. Honestly, I think writing is such an innate thing that we sometimes set aside, and we do not realize the role that it plays in our day-to-day. I mean, I come from a family of writers, but I was the last to actually write. And so I know that it's not always easy to do. Why? I want to ask you, Kellie, why is writing such a powerful drive, and what are some of the things that those who are resisting it can come to address or come to consider in order for that modality that is almost like a portal, that modality to be something that allows them to expand even more into that place of joy? Why is it such a powerful experience or a powerful activity? And how can those who may be resisting it or who may have blocks in it, really, what are the 1, 2, 3 steps? You mentioned meditation, digging deep. Just to take us through, why is it such a drive, and what are the steps that we can take to enjoy it more, to flow with it more, with more ease?
I think that's such a great question. I think that every human being has the need to be seen, and has the need to be heard, and has the need to be known. Even when it's scary, there is that thing inside of us that says, even if it's only 2 people, I want to be seen by them. I want someone to know me. And writing is a great way to do that in a world where, excuse me, in a world where everybody seems to be shouting, and people who, there are some people in the world that are just easily seen. They can walk into a room of 1,000 people and everyone will see them. And then there's other people who could walk into a room where they're by themselves and nobody else would know they were in there. There's that need. And I think writing is one of those great ways. In some ways, it's very safe because you sort of are behind the writing. You don't have someone necessarily with you. You don't have to put yourself out there. You don't have to really be face to face. John Green, the author, said, and I always thought this was a great quote, writers are people who want to tell you their story but not make eye contact. And that was a really good way to say that. So I think that we all have that need to be seen, to be heard, to let our experiences be a part of the collective consciousness. We all are drops in this ocean, but we want the rest of the ocean to know we're there. And to be a part of that. And I think that, as I said, it's very common when I do a book signing or I'm online or somebody from the Tattoo Buddha will send me an email and they'll say, I always wanted to write, or I have a book I want to write, or I started a book but I couldn't finish it. Because it's such a great way, when you're writing, nobody interrupts you. When you tell a story, especially if you're telling one with a lot of people, or, you're telling one with your spouse who doesn't always hear you all the time, and they'll just stop you in the middle, hey, did you get groceries? And there goes your story. But when you're writing, no one interrupts you. You have as long as you have to get that out. No one corrects you. You can say it the way you want. It's a fantastic way to meet that very human and very important need that we have. Our human life is so precious. And we have no guarantee of how long we'll have it. And writing leaves something permanent, at least until it fades. But writing leaves something that is visceral, it's physical, it's real. And it doesn't necessarily stop when you stop and leave this world. And so I think that's another big attraction to writing, is it is a way to deal with impermanence. It is a way to ensure that you can be heard, and in a somewhat lasting way. For me, the best way to start writing is to, first of all, admit to yourself that you want to write. We have a culture that just doesn't really explore or always encourage the arts. And so a lot of times, the first time I see somebody, they'll say, I want to write, but no, that's silly. Or, oh, that's a waste of time. I need to focus on this. And that's low self-worth. That's a sense of other people telling you what's valuable and not valuable. That's sometimes a sense of people telling you that you're not valuable. And so the best thing you can do is, admit that you want to write and accept that that's okay. In fact, it's wonderful. You don't have to be a college graduate. You don't have to be an amazing word person. You don't even have to spell really well. There are machines that will help you now. All you have to be to write is who you are. And who you are is absolutely enough for you to write. And accept that and begin to understand and take that external pressure off and say, I want to write this, whether it's an article or a memoir about your life or a story about something you went through or a story about dragons. You have this story inside you that's starting to bubble up, and you can write it. You're the person to write it. One of the big things that people will say is, well, I was going to write this, but there's already a book like that. And again, that's a sort of a false message of low self-worth. There may be a book about that, but it's not a book by you. And you make the difference. And that's, again, where embodied writing comes in, because you're really writing from your alignment, from your understanding. So first, accept you want to write, and accept that not only is that okay, it's wonderful, and you don't have to be afraid. Procrastination is fear. We have a tendency, particularly in Western culture, to think, oh, procrastination means you're lazy or you didn't really want to. But really, when it comes down to it, putting things off, procrastinating or not doing things is because of fear. Mm-hmm. What if I write it and somebody laughs at me? What if I write it and nobody reads it? What if I go to write this and I don't have the words? And I know because my book deals with grief, that's something that I confronted, and a lot of people do, is sometimes when your grief is so deep and so strong, it's harder to communicate because you just don't have words for that. You just don't know. There's just not a word that describes how you feel at that moment. And that can make you afraid to write those things. But my experience is that when you sit down, when you open up to that, the words will come. And they don't have to be the perfect words. They can be whatever words you have right now. If it needs another word, you can put one in later. Writing leads to rewriting. And that's what's great about writing. Unlike certain decisions we make in life, in writing, you can always take it back. You can always change it. You can always go in a different direction. So there's a lot of empowerment in writing. There's a lot of freedom in writing from that perspective. So, if you find yourself procrastinating, sit down and really take some, kind of meditate, find your center, find those rhythms, find that energy around you, and just ask yourself, what am I afraid of? What am I afraid of? And it won't just help you write, it will also maybe help you understand what's going on in your world, in your life, in your heart. Are you afraid of being laughed at? Have you been laughed at before? Is that a trauma that you didn't touch before? Are you afraid that no one will read it? Well, what if you wrote it and no one read it? You still wrote it. It's still out there. And you'll find that there are more readers of what we write out there than you think. And someone would read it. But the more you understand that fear, the easier it is to work with it. You can't just, pretend it isn't there. You have to work with those fears. You have to befriend them. One of the great and most fun Buddhist concepts is the idea of having tea with your demons. And instead of fighting your demons, fighting the things that haunt you, fighting the things you're afraid, sort of sit down with them in an imagery sort of way and have tea with them and say, why are you here? What can I do for you? How can I help you go to an appropriate place? How can I help you journey forward and leave me? And the more you can work with your fear, the easier it's going to be to get those first words down. And really find your way. There are some people who are still very comfortable writing with pencil and paper. Do it. There are some people who only like to type on laptops because it's either visually or physically more easy. Do it. If you have to write in ketchup on a napkin, however it comes out of you that makes you feel good, do it. For that point, when that beginning part of writing, throw away the do and do not list, throw away the perfection, and just write. However you like to, whatever you do. In exercise, they always say the best form of exercise is the one you will do. And I think that's the same with writing. The best way to write is the way that you want to write, the way that feels good to you. And what you're going to discover once you start that first bit of writing is you're going to be telling somebody that you can't go to dinner because you're writing, and you can't do this because you're writing, because it will just begin to flow because it's from a genuine place. So, before you start, picking your book cover, do that pre-work on you, work with you. And then once those words start to flow, then follow that energy. Is this going to be a fiction story? Is this going to be a nonfiction article? Is this going to be an inspiration book? And let that happen. Too much of the problems we have in writing are because we're trying to put it into a box that someone has built. And to me, writing is water, and it will fit in whatever container that you want it to fit in, and it will take that shape and go forward.
Trust, actually, that requires, Kellie. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, yeah.
Trust, because we will start out knowing we want to write, and I love what you said about there's no one way of starting through, and there's no time limit. Some books take a week or 6 weeks. Some books take 6 years. My book probably, I would say, took probably 30 years or so, So there is definitely no one way. And I love what you said about, this is something that is unique to each and every one. And just writing alone gets us somewhere, even if nobody sees it. So there are different reasons for actually putting that pen to paper or that hand to screen. I would love you to tell us, Kellie, this is writing in itself as a process, has been known to take us, yes, deep inside that self, into that place of oneness. What is it about that process? Is there something about the way we transform from rejection or from pain into a higher place? It's a very feminine activity, I believe, writing. It has a feminine essence to it, having to pause and having to do it on your own. It encourages us to step within. But I wanted to get your perspective of, you've mentioned a bit about it in the embodied writing response. I'd love to explore that a bit more, that process itself. Is there something about that particular modality of writing that allows us to transcend shadow of fear into light and love?
Absolutely. And I love what you say about trust and just that understanding. Therapeutic writing is one of the oldest and best type of therapeutic modalities that come out. That ability to sit and write and really get into things that maybe we're afraid to say out loud. But when you're writing them, writing is incredibly cathartic. It can really open those boxes and get it out, particularly when you're writing and you're thinking no one's going to see it. That's even better. Or if you're doing it in a therapeutic setting with a trusted therapeutic advisor or a trusted counselor, it is one of the ways that a lot of people really begin or forward their therapy journey, because it's hard to just sit and talk. Again, there's sometimes no words that you know or that you can say, and saying them sort of changes them. But writing allows you to open that up in such an internal way, because writing comes from such introspection. It's sometimes very easy to speak without thinking. It's almost impossible to write without thinking, because you have to generate that impulse, that brain impulse that goes to your hand. You have to get that sort of energy or frequency. That writing is a very kinesthetic, physical thing. You have to think or imagine what you're doing and open that up. Your brain has to tell that actual thought through your hand to some kind of mode, whether it's the paper or the keyboard. And so it really gives you permission, sort of an internal permission, particularly if you've had a very traumatic event or childhood trauma. One of the things that you're told frequently is don't talk about it. Don't say it. And that gets in you, that causes a lot of trauma response. Whereas very few people tell you, don't write this down. And so you have a sort of an internal permission to do that. And you don't run up against don't you dare say that out loud. Writing is the things that we weren't allowed to say out loud. Mm-hmm. And you're allowed to write them, and you're allowed to do it in this quiet way. And so I think that makes it and allows it to go deeper into who you are or what you're going through, because you don't have that many blocks. Because writing is very physical, you feel like you have more control. There's a lot of people, and I'm one of them, that when you get really nervous, you just start talking blah, 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 blah. And then later you're like, oh my gosh, did I say that? But writing, you have the control. If I don't want something to come out of me, I can pull my hand up at any minute and stop it. Mm. And so when you have fear, that little bit of empowerment, that little bit of agency that says you have all the control of what you're doing, can be really courageous and really helpful to get those things to come out. And then once they're out, you see them in black and white. You see them in front of you, and that helps you understand them more. So I think writing is really a very internal and cathartic process, particularly for people who've experienced trauma or grief or deal with a lot of bad messaging from childhood onward, because it is such a deeply personal act. It's such a deep agency of action. And it's something that most people leave you to your own. You know, they don't get involved in telling you not to write or not to do things. And so it's that little key. You know, a lot of things get locked in the boxes of our mind, and writing is one of those keys that no one can take from you. You know, if they don't let you have a pencil, they don't let you have a computer, you can write in your mind. You can hear that story in your head. Because ultimately, as beings, we are stories. You know, our life is a story. Our thoughts are a story. Our shadows are stories. Our light is stories. And most of us have a story that's made of both. And so, you know, when we understand that we are living stories. And even when we leave this precious life, even when we leave this earth, the stories of us remain. You know, what do we do when someone leaves us? We tell stories about them. So the story, those things that we want to write, those things that make us live inside of this box that we hold the key to. And writing is such a deep way to get to those things that we can feel safe about. That particularly with therapeutic help and therapeutic professionals, we can open that door. And for some people, it's really the first time they see what's in those boxes. Journaling, processing trauma through journaling and therapeutic writing has always been a very good treatment option for people. And I always want to be very clear that if you're doing that deep, intense writing and you do have a history of trauma, you want a therapeutic professional with you. You don't want to just do that alone, because you can also get lost in your own writing. Not as easily as you can your mental processes, but it's good to have that support. It's good to have that person with you.
Yeah, thank you, Kellie, because that perception of self that is wanting to control what is being written, then there's also that version of self that wants to flow, because there is flow and letting the words just come out, and there's also the need to have the boundaries that are healthy. If you just talk about that, there's a control of the words, you know, the words flowing from the brain, or are they being led through another part of us, a higher self part of us, and we can flow into that, because this is about permission at different levels. And this is why also working with different groups, allowing ourselves to be conditioned and inspired by people who are resonating, or who we resonate with in the themes they're exploring, in the way they are expanding. There are different levels of permission, different levels of control, and different levels of flow. There's as writers who are wanting to tap into different parts of us. What would you say about those things, about how we can become to balance control, balance flow, and allow ourselves to have permission to flow, or to pause, or to have boundaries? How do the groups that we have around us support us to do these things, to expand our permission, to flow, and to have control, to have a bit of and I think control for me is not about being a masculine and stopping our creativity. I see it more as that pause, and having boundaries, and allowing ourselves to flow at a particular pace. So what would you say about that?
I really appreciate that understanding because it's something I don't hear much, and I really, really resonate with that idea that control isn't always a bad thing, that it can be a very healthy and a very important thing to have as part of you. And I like the way that you look at how writing and how this process both flows through masculine and feminine channels, and we kind of have to balance that a little bit. I do see writing as a very feminine channel act because it's so nurturing, and I think that's where kind of the balance in those two comes from, is that while you're doing this writing, you're also willing to be nurturing of yourself and of what you're doing, and the nurturing involves caregiving and boundaries and being aware. The most important thing, I think, in having the freedom to let writing flow is also having the confidence that you are aware of what's happening. So that if it starts to go out of bounds, if it starts to become unhealthy, if it starts harming, you are aware enough to say, okay, this needs to stop right now. And we need to have some introspection with what we've done so far. And I think that's really it. The best writing that I have done have been at times when I have just let everything pour out. And I can be typing and crying or typing and laughing, and it's just coming. And that's that just absolute free flow. But before I can do that writing, I have to be sure I am in a safe place. I am aware of, what I'm trying to do with my writing, what I'm trying to write. I am aware of my feelings. I haven't had enough sleep and food that I can sustain that process. Writing is a very physical thing, and if you're not caring for yourself, if you're not giving yourself those energies and that understanding to physically help you, it's a lot easier to fall apart. And so, before you give yourself the freedom to flow, have the responsibility to put yourself in the best circumstances you can for that. If you're going to do a really cathartic writing experience. And so I do think that sense of feminine nurturing, that sense of bringing out is done really well, but also with a sense of awareness. I'm starting to feel bad, or I'm starting to, a lot of times our bodies will tell us if our minds are lost in this process. Your body memory, your body signals, your body energies will let you know. Suddenly your back is hurting, or your eyes are blurry, or you start to feel really weak, and that's a sign. You have to be responsible to yourself to be able to know your tells, know your body when it says this is enough, know your body when it says no, I feel safe and good, let's keep going. Awareness isn't just about who's in the room; it's about your body. It's about what you're doing and what it's doing with you, and being a part of that. For me, so there's this wonderful time to flow, but then there's also editing or rewriting, which is where then you add that measure of agency and control, and say, I've just written all this stuff out of me. And if you're writing for a catharsis, if you're writing in a therapeutic way, then you can take that writing and because a lot of times when you're writing to get stuff out, you start with one sentence and then it just becomes sort of a rant, and it's good because it gets that out. But then you have the second part, which is the rereading or the rewriting, where you go back and you can say, okay, this was a little extreme, and this was all rant, and this is the kernel that I needed to get. You can sort of fish through it like a treasure chest and sort of look at what can be cut away, what was just getting all the emotion off the top. Because a lot of times, those little gems that we have, that we find in our writing, come surrounded in a bunch of packaging. And those, when we write freely and we get all that packaging out, then comes in that sense of control and safety that says, let's cut away this. This is just, and then what we need to know is in the center of that. This is what I've wanted to talk about. This is what I've been looking for. This is what's bothering me. It's like when you have those discussions with a group of friends and you don't feel right when you leave, and then 3 days later, while you're brushing your teeth, you're like, I know what I didn't like about that, because it takes all that time to get all the stuffing off of it. And writing is like that. When you're in that flow period, you get all the stuff and you just let it all out. But then is the rewriting or the editing or the reviewing, where you're in a different space. You've had a breath of fresh air, you've taken a walk, you've rested, and now you come back and look at that bulk that you've written and say, this were all the surrounding things, but here's the gem. Here's what I needed to see, or here's what I needed to do. In fiction writing, professional writing, it's not uncommon for me to finish a day having written about 2,000 words, and then after it's edited, I have about 500 or 600 that are going to stay in the book. And I always edit about 6 weeks after I wrote it, so that I'm in a different space and I'm far away from it. So I can come in a little bit more clinically and say, yeah, that doesn't work. And, oh, this is great. And so I think that's, one of the big things that is a great gift to us as we understand those higher frequencies is our understanding of time. Time is such an important dimension, and it's easy to forget because it's not going to scream at us. But there is that sense of giving yourself the time to come back, or giving yourself the time to do this, and understanding that, in the whole sky, a cloud is going to come and then a cloud is going to go. And if all you can see is that cloud, it's okay to wait. You don't have to do it today. Because 2 or 3 days later, it's going to look completely different on the sky. The sky never changes, it never stays the same. And so I think understanding writing that way and writing cathartically that way, and working within those higher frequencies of openness, you really also are really healthy to understand that concept of time and that ability to take time and let time make you wiser. The experience of writing is going to teach you something all by itself. And so give yourself time to process that lesson. Writing, and it's one of the favorite words I use in writing, is the one thing I really like to see us getting away from is the idea that writing is a talent. Like you're just born with this great talent for writing. Writing is a skill, but mostly writing is a process. And I really like to see us going to say that, there are just certain people who are tapped with the writing stick and they can do it and I can't. That's never a helpful thought. And it's really not factual. We all have within us that process of writing. Writing itself is an evolving process. And time is a big part of that. What we wrote at 13 isn't what we're going to write at 23. And sometimes it's helpful to go back and look at what we wrote at 13. And sometimes it's good to say, I threw that away. I'm writing something new now. And I think that's the key to all of that, that balance in freedom and responsibility, is to understand what time you're in, where you are, and to be willing to be in that time. There are times to really dig into your stuff, and there's times to really rest and say, not today. and give yourself that permission.
How important, Kellie, is, because I thank you for that, because that balance and understanding self and allowing ourselves to go through that process with less judgment and trusting is so important. How important would you say having the right groups around us? What part does that play in that process of writing?
Oh, that's incredibly important. There's lots of different groups or types of people to have around you, depending on what kind of writing you're doing. They always say, and it is probably universally true, writers first are readers, because the first ways you learn to write are by reading how other people write and seeing how they do and how writing works and how writing creates. But then beyond that, when you're actually doing that writing, if you're doing a cathartic writing, if you're doing therapeutic writing, or you're embodying your writing really deeply from your experiences, the first person that you need around you is the person who is going to nurture you. If you lose grasp of your self-nurturing, that person who is going to nurture you, or who knows good boundary for you, whether that's a therapeutic professional or a friend or a sibling or a parent who has your trust to help you. But to really kind of be that sort of, line on the field that helps you stay within a healthy boundary, that's incredibly important so that you don't get overwhelmed to the point where you can't help yourself. If you're doing writing for professional reasons or personal reasons, or you're creatively writing, you need both types of people. You need people who are just going to say, yes, I'll read that. Yes, 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 keep going. There, you need your cheerleaders. You need those people who are just going to really encourage you and say, you've got this, and I've got you back, and you do this, and I'm proud of you. You also need those people who are willing to be guides or critique you and say, if you are trying to write professionally, this is what works and this isn't what working. But do it in a way that's positive and that's guiding. One of the most important, I think, things when you look at writing mentors is you should pick them. They shouldn't pick you. You should go to people that you trust to tell you the truth. Because, sometimes the truth in writing can be a hard conversation. And you want to hear that not from somebody who's just sort of imposing their self or their lack of boundaries on you. Because the world is full of people who will be happy to tell you what to do with your writing, who have absolutely no boundary or care for you in that. And you want to avoid those. So you want to start with that small circle of trusted friends and writers and people that you grow organically to you. And then start to make sure, for every 2 or 3 people that are your cheerleaders, you have 1 or 2 people who you trust to tell you if your writing could use this, or if you want to do that, or if you're getting to a place that doesn't seem healthy or helpful. If you're writing professionally, you always need that person who says, this sentence can be better. But you want them, you need to hear that from somebody who knows is telling it to you for your own good. And that's where it all comes back to what you said earlier. The biggest step in all of this is trust. If you don't trust your mentors, if you don't trust your chosen communities, it's really hard to have a healthy, effective writing. If you're writing therapeutically, you have your therapeutic advisors. You need to have people you can trust with the truth. Because if you pull out, or you look at trauma, or you look at grief, or you look at something that's really hard, there are certain people in your life that you can go to and say, this is what I found out this happened, or I found out this thing that happened is really what's keeping me from doing this. And then there's those people in your life that you absolutely should not say that to, because they are either part of the perpetration of that trauma, or there's somebody who's so lost in their own trauma that their answers are either toxically positive or just really unhelpful. I find this very sad, and it happens a lot in Western culture, where you dig something up from your writing, or you remember a trauma that you really at one time thought maybe it wasn't so bad, but now later you've looked back and you've written about it, and you go, ever since that day, I never wanted to do this, or I couldn't do that, or I've had this nightmare, or whatever it is. And you go to someone, and they'll say, oh, you're thinking too much. We just need to, pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and go on. And they just minimize all this work you just did. And so those people, are people that you don't want to take those gems you pulled out of writing to, because it ultimately can set you backwards and take away that courage and that permission you had to write. And so what you do want to do when you're writing therapeutically is, besides your therapeutic professional, have those people that you can tell anything to, and they're going to receive it in a nurturing, healthy way, and empower you and give you agency over your journey. I always say, don't go to people who are really willing to tell you what to do. Go to people who are willing to hear you and to feel what you're feeling. And then what to do will be apparent, because we're not creating, we're aligning. We're aligning with something that is in us and around us. And we're just making those connections. And so I think that's so very powerful, and makes writing such a very powerful thing.
I love the nuggets that you have shared. Thank you so much, Kelly. This is going to be really helpful for those of us who are wanting to expand the writing experience, really understand the process, and release the resistance that allow us to align more with our own dreams, with our own desires and goals. So I really appreciate you joining me today, Kelly.
Oh, this was a fantastic conversation. I've had so much fun. Thank you so much.
And where can people find you when they want to connect with you, Kelly?
If they look at me, I am very easy to connect with and accessible. The best place to do it is my website, which is kellieschorr.com. And there's a little tab on it that says connect. And you can type in there and you can type me any message and it will go straight to me.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you soon, Kelly. Maybe.
Oh, I hope so. Oh, and best to you. And thank you for putting all this in the world because I think it's so important.
Brilliant, brilliant. And I want to thank our audience for joining us today and to ask you to connect with Kelly. There is a lot of nuggets that she has, a lot of expertise that allows us to really come to that place of expanding those messages, the stories that we have, whether it's fiction or in non-fiction, allowing us to expand in those processes. I also ask you to connect with Daily Soul Bytes. We have episodes every Wednesday, new episodes every Wednesday, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daily Soul Bytes Show. Bye-bye.